Chapter 19. Minley started awake as she heard the scraping of the door against the dirt. The moonlight streamed in from the window, lighting the bare hut. The boy had given her his pile of grass to sleep on and joined the buffalo, using some of its grass as a pillow. But as the buffalo snored loudly, Minley could see the bowl-shaped hollow in the hay was empty. "I wonder where he went," Minley said, and she found herself thinking of Ma and Ba and Dragon all waiting for her. Suddenly the room seemed to ache with loneliness. The boy must be meeting his friend, Minley realized, and unable to control her curiosity, she crept to the window to peek. Yes, the friend was there. Minley was startled when she saw her. Even with the buffalo boy blocking most of her view, Minley could see his friend was beautiful, even more beautiful than he had described her. She seemed to glow like a pearl in the moonlight, and her deep blue silk dress seemed to be the same color as the sky. The bag she held in her graceful hand seemed to be made out of the same silk, but the silver thread embroidered on it made it look as if it were made from a piece of the star-scattered sky. Everything about her seemed finer and more delicate than the average person. There was definitely something unusual about the buffalo boy's friend. Minley watched her laugh and then listened intently as the buffalo boy spoke. He gestured to the house, and Minley ducked down just out of sight as the friend glanced toward her. "He must be asking her about how I can see the king," Minley thought. As soon as she dared, Minley peeked again out the window. The buffalo boy's friend had her eyes closed toward the sky as if listening to the wind. Then she looked at the buffalo boy and spoke. He nodded, and the girl smiled at what Minley imagined was the buffalo boy's enthusiastic thanks. Minley sat down on the wooden stool. "She knows a lot of things," the buffalo boy had said about his friend. After seeing her, Minley was ready to believe it. "But who is she?" Minley asked aloud. And just then, the buffalo boy came back inside. "Oh, you're awake," he said when he saw Minley. As much as he tried, he couldn't hide the leftover smiles and laughter from his visit. His eyes sparkled as he sprawled himself out on the bed of grass. "I talked to my friend. She said that the king might be at the market of Green Abundance tomorrow morning. But you are going to have to find him yourself." "Really?" Minley said. "How does she know?" The boy shrugged. "You didn't ask?" Minley asked. "Don't you think it's mysterious that you only see her once in a while? And you never visit her. She only visits you. And that she knows things like where the king might be tomorrow? Who is she, really?" "She's my friend," the boy said simply. "That's who she is, and that's enough for me." As Minley looked at the buffalo boy aglow with happiness against his poor surroundings, she saw it was enough for him. More than enough, as the smile that kept curling up on his face told her. Minley's questions fell from her as she realized there was nothing else to say. Chapter 20. Ma and Ba walked quietly through the forest. Their steps made a rhythm to the music of forest noises. Ba's arms ached from carrying the goldfish bowl, but he said nothing. "I can carry the goldfish if you're tired," Ma said. Ba opened his mouth to protest when he heard, "Let her, old man. It's her way of saying she's not angry any more." Ba closed his mouth and looked at the goldfish bowl, and then at Ma. She stood, waiting, clearly ignorant of the fish's words. He handed the bowl to Ma. "If it gets heavy, I can take it back," he said. "We can take turns," Ma said, nodding. She was carrying the fishbowl when the night fell and they came back home to the village. The neighbors saw their return and all crowded around as if they were selling good luck. "Did you find Minley?" they asked. "Where is she? Where did you get a goldfish?" Both Ma and Ba shook their heads over and over again. "No," they said, "we didn't find her. We don't know where she is. The goldfish is from the goldfish peddler. We followed his footprints thinking they were Minley's." "And we decided," Ba finally said, "to come back and wait. After she finds Never-Ending Mountain, Minley will come home." "Wait for her," one of the neighbors said. How can you let your daughter search for Never-Ending Mountain? You are just as lost as her. We tried to find her, but now we do not know where to look. So we will wait, Ba said, and then glanced at Ma, who, through her lips tightened at the neighbor's words, did not disagree. We must trust Minli. She will come home. And then Ma and Ba went into their house, leaving the sea of shaking heads behind them. Ma placed the goldfish bowl on the table and quietly began making dinner. A soft breeze seemed to blow in the moonlight, spilling it through the open window and lighting the bowl like a lantern. Ba looked at Ma cautiously. Her face looked wary, but the gentle wind that rippled the bowl's water seemed to smooth the creases of her face. And when the cloud-white rice was finished, Ma took her chopsticks and fed the fish from her bowl. Chapter 21. Minli and the buffalo boy pushed through the crowd as the sun burned the tops of their heads. Minli, used to the spare harvest of her village, couldn't help gaping at the tall mounds of food for sale at the market of green abundance. The street was open, and the courtyard was filled with umbrella-covered stands and stalls, flaunting jade-colored cabbages, curled cucumbers, purple eggplants, and tangy oranges. Glossy sugared hawthorn berries, like rubies on a stick, made Minli's mouth water. "I don't see the king anywhere," Minli said. "Well, maybe he's not here yet," the buffalo boy said. "I don't know if I'll find him here," Minli said. Now, in the daylight, the buffalo boy's friend didn't seem as extraordinary. What would the king be doing at a street market anyway? "She said he'd be here, so he will," the buffalo boy said, his mouth making a stubborn line. "Hey, get away from that!" a vendor yelled as the buffalo attempted to eat frosty green lettuce. The buffalo boy quickly pulled him away. "Get your buffalo out of here!" the vendor shouted, as red-faced as the radishes he was selling. "I better take him away," the buffalo boy said, pulling the buffalo's head away from the arrays of tempting food. "He's hungry. I should take him to pasture." "I'll stay here," Minli said. "You don't need to look for the king with me." "Okay," the boy said. "If you need a place to stay tonight, you know where my hut is. If not, maybe I'll see you around. Good luck!" "Thanks," Minli said, but as he carelessly waved goodbye, she realized that she might not see him again. Before he disappeared from sight, she grabbed the last coin out of her bag and ran to him. "Wait," Minli said. "Here, take this." "No," the boy laughed. "I don't need that. You keep it." "But," Minli started, but he had already turned around. "Goodbye," she heard him call, and the buffalo snorted a farewell as well. Minli smiled wryly to herself. Now what? Minli thought as she wandered past stalls, weaving around merchants and customers. How am I supposed to find the king here? "Please, spare a piece of fruit for an old man," a voice creaked. Minli turned around and saw a wrinkled poor man begging at a peach stand. He was dirty and bent, and his clothes looked as if they were made from rags used to wash floors. "Please," he begged the peach vendor, "I'm so thirsty. One small peach. Your smallest?" "Go away, old man," the fat vendor said. "No money, no peach." "Please," the beggar said again, weakly. "Pity a tired old man." "Get away from here, you worthless beggar," the vendor spat out, "or I'll call the guards on you." The vendor's loud voice had attracted attention from passers-by, and a small crowd began to form in front of the peach stand. "It's disgraceful to treat an old man like that," someone murmured. "Just give him a peach." "All of you are so generous with my property," the vendor glared at the crowd. "If you care so much, buy him a peach." As Minli watched the beggar's hands outstretched and shaking with hunger, she felt a sharp pang inside her. It reminded her of Ba reaching out with his last chopstick of rice for her fish. The copper coin she had offered to the buffalo boy was warm in her hand. She could almost feel her heart beating against its round edges. "Here," she said, handing the vendor the coin. Then she picked the largest peach on the stand and handed it to the old man. He bowed to her gratefully and eagerly ate the peach. Forgetting about the inner city and the palace for the moment, Minley watched him. In fact, as if under a spell, the whole crowd stood and watched him swallow the fruit until he held a peach pit in his hand. "Thank you," the beggar said in a much stronger voice, and he bowed to the onlooking people. "The peach was so delicious, I wish for all of you to be able to taste it. If you would humor an old man and stay a little while, I shall share my good fortune." The old man took a small stick out of his pocket and bent down. In the dirt next to the black bricks, he dug a small hole and planted his peach pit. He stuck his stick upright in the little mound and then then asked for water. Minley, now completely fascinated, took out her water jug and handed it to him. As he poured water onto his stick, it trembled. And was she imagining it? It seemed to grow. And it was growing. The stick grew higher and higher and thicker until it was the width of Minley's arm. When she could no longer see the top of it, pink flowers and branches began to blossom out of it. As the sweet scent of the flowers filled the air, Minley realized the stick had become a peach tree. The crowd of people seemed to realize this too, as they all gaped at it open-mouthed. Even the stingy vendor left his fruit stand to stare at it in awe. Like pink snow, the petals fell from the tree and made a soft carpet on the dirt. Green leaves sprouted, and as they cascaded over the branches, pale moon-colored balls like pearls developed. Almost as if they were small balloons being blown with air, they grew into round fruit, blushing pink and red as they developed. Soon the tree was heavy with them, and the air was full of the enchanting smell of ripe peaches. Children gathered around and stared longingly at the luscious fruit, while the adults gulped with their mouths watering. Finally, the old man reached up, plucked a peach from the tree, and handed it to one of the people in the crowd. "Please," he said, waving his wand, "help yourself." The crowd needed no other urging. Young children climbed the tree and passed down the fruit, while the taller adults simply stretched and grabbed. A boy with a tired horse climbed onto its back to reach an especially red peach that called him. Before long, everyone's mouths were full of soft, sweet peach flesh and groans of delight. Even the peach vendor, his stand forgotten, stood under the tree with his eyes closed contentedly and peach juice dribbling out of his mouth. Minley, however, didn't join in the feast of peaches. "If I hadn't been eating peaches all the way to the city," Minley said to herself, "I'd be the first one climbing the tree." But as she was slightly tired of peaches, Minley saw that no one else noticed. She noticed that every time someone plucked a peach from the tree, a peach from the fruit stand disappeared. "The beggar is using the vendor's peaches for his tree," Minley laughed to herself as she glanced at him through the fruit-eating crowd. He was watching with an amused look, and suddenly Minley saw that the beggar wasn't really that old at all. "He must be a magician. Maybe he can help me get into the inner city." Minley edged toward him. As she weaved her way to him, the last peach was picked from the tree, and the leaves and branches began to disappear. The tree trunk seemed to shrivel into itself, and it grew thinner and shorter. The crowd had finished their peaches, and the ground was littered with peach pits. When Minley finally reached the beggar, the tiny twig of the tree vanished underneath the pile of peach pits, and the beggar was turning to leave. "Wait," Minley said, and grabbed his arm. However, as Minley took hold of his sleeve, it pulled back and a glint of gold shone. Hastily, the beggar pushed back his sleeve, but the quick glance was enough for Minley to see that he wore a gold bracelet in the shape of a dragon. They stared at each other as Minley's quick-thinking mind somersaulted. Only the imperial family is allowed to use the image of a dragon, Dragon had said. Everyone knows a golden dragon is always and only worn by kings, said the buffalo boy. The words flashed in her mind, and Minley could scarcely breathe. You're wearing a dragon, Minley gasped. Only that is allowed to wear a golden dragon. You must be... Where's that beggar? A loud, angry shout cut through the chaos. Minley recognized the vendor's voice. He stole my peaches! I'll get him! Quickly, the beggar shook off Minley from his arm and began to run. She stared in shock as she finished her sentence. You must be, Minley whispered to the ragged, disappearing figure. The king! Chapter 22. Minley shook herself from her shock. The king? Minley said. I can't lose him now. And in a panic, she began to run after the tattered figure. And it was quite a chase, or it would have been, if the beggar had realized he was being followed. He wove in and out, around people and bins of rice, each step taking them closer to the unused areas of the city. Behind a pile of discarded blankets, Minley thought she had lost him, but luckily the gray sleeve of his loose jacket waved at her, and she saw him round the walled corner of the inner city. As an abandoned wagon hid her from his view, she saw him push against a portion of the wall. With a slow groan, the wall moved. It's a secret door to the inner city, Minley gasped, and she was able to reach it just before it closed completely. With both hands, she pressed hard against it, and the door pushed open. And like a lid of a jewelry box, the door opened into a landscape of radiant colors. The bamboo, pine, and plum leaves seemed to shine in the sun as if carved from emeralds, and the accents of the pink and red flowers were like nestled rubies. Steps away from her feet, Minley could see a patterned pathway made of water-worn pebbles. The central jade green lake mirrored the arching tiled roofs of the pavilions and the rough beauty of large weathered rock sculptures. A winding covered walkway lifted up from the cloudy water like a lotus flower. It could only be the palace garden. But Minley barely noticed this. Instead, she stood with large eyes staring at the figure in front of her. The beggar was wiping his face with a delicate white cloth, and Minley saw again that he was not an old man at all. In fact, he was younger than Ba. The gray of his hair was wiped away with the cloth as well, and his beard and head were as glossy black as Minley's. His gray rags had been cast off in a pile next to him, and he was clothed in a bright yellow silk, the color of the sun. Intricate dragons and multicolored clouds that matched the designs of the gold bracelet he wore were embroidered on his robes and glittered in the light. There was no doubt now that he was the king. Then the king turned around and saw her. At his glance, Minley shrank to the ground in a humble kowtow. "Your Majesty," Minley breathed, and her knees could feel the thumping of her heart in her chest. "Caught," Minley heard him say, and she peeked up to see the king looking at her with the same amused expression he'd had as a beggar watching the people eat the peaches. He shook his head at her. With his eyes twinkling at her, he could have been the young father of one of her village friends. "And by you," he said, "my little benefactor, I knew you were a clever one." "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" A chorus of voices came through the air toward them, and Minley could see a parade of servants in the distance running across the zigzag bridge. "Well, you mustn't be caught by them," the king said to Minley. "Then they would find out all about my little adventures, and then where will I be?" And he pulled Minley up to her feet and pushed her behind one of the giant gnarled stone carvings, kicking his rags over her. "Quickly, quickly," he said, "and don't say a word. I command you not to say a word or to come out until I say so." Minley clutched the rough stone and made herself as small as possible. Hundreds of footsteps were approaching like falling rain from a thunderstorm. "What is this?" the king demanded. "Has war been declared on the city?" "Your Majesty," an out-of-breath voice said, "we have been searching for you." "Searching for me?" the king said. "I have been here in the garden for hours." We must have missed you," the voice stuttered. "None could find you. The guards had not seen you, and we feared—" "You feared the king of the city of bright moonlight had been spirited away?" the king laughed. "Not this time, Counselor Chu. However, I do feel the wish to commune with the moon tonight." "Your Majesty?" the voice said. "Yes," the king said decisively. "Tonight I wish to be alone in the garden with the moon. Have a meal brought to me in the Clasping the Moon pavilion, and do not disturb me until morning." "Yes, Your Majesty," the voice said, and Minley couldn't help but peek out. She saw rows and rows of finely dressed people kneeling with their heads on the ground in front of the king. Their rich silk clothing shimmered in the fading sunlight. One man dressed in black kneeled closer to the king, separate from the rest of the courtiers. Minley guessed he was Counselor Chu. "Actually, bring me 2 meals, the king said, and glanced toward Minley. She caught his eye and quickly shrank back out of sight. "2 meals, Your Majesty?" Counselor Chu asked, with just the faintest question in his voice. "Yes, 2 meals, the king said. I shall honor the spirit of the moon with her own meal, since she will be keeping me company. It is only fair." "Yes, Your Majesty," the counselor said. Minley could only guess how puzzled he was, but he was well trained enough to keep it out of his voice. "In an hour's time," the king said, "I shall be at the Clasping the Moon pavilion. I want the food waiting for me and nothing else. I do not wish to be disturbed by anyone this evening." "Yes, Your Majesty," the voice said again, and Minley could hear the shuffling and swishing of silk as the group rose and took leave of the king. "They've gone," the king said in a low voice. "You can come out now." Minley crawled out from behind the sculpture. "Well, my little friend," he said to her, "now that you know who I am, come walk with me and tell me who you are."